Chapter 1856 Three Kingdoms. Zhang Yi promised that if he could pass the test of this trial, he would share part of his gains with Brian. They also promised to provide other resources, which made the hesitant Brian decide to join Zhang Yi's team. Brian looks silly, but he's actually not stupid at all. Zhang Yi's team consists of a stable group of 4, which means that there will be no intrigue among the 4 people, and they will not lag behind when fighting as a team. Compared to joining other uncertain teams, becoming Zhang Yi's opponent is actually a good choice. Therefore, Zhang Yi's team has completed the configuration of 5 people. It's not that he didn't try to find the 6th person. The more people there are, the greater the chances of them winning in the end. However, there is no suitable candidate yet. One after another, the rest of the people also began to act. After all, time was limited, and they had to select suitable teammates as quickly as possible. King Arthur took the initiative to find Odin. This is a middle-aged, thin, white man with a mustache. His cheeks are deeply sunken, and he looks a bit malnourished, which makes people wonder if he is taking any banned drugs. However, Odin has a pair of eyes as sharp as an eagle. People who look into his eyes will involuntarily be immersed in his eyes. Odin, the god king of Asgard, and Adolf Muller, an alien from Prussia. Odin, let's join forces. In the current situation, although we have some competition with each other, as Europeans, can we cooperate with each other in the interests of both sides? Odin looked down at the right hand that King Arthur stretched out to him. He raised his head, hesitated for a moment, and then shook it hard. Very good. I think so too. I hope we can have a pleasant cooperation. It's a pleasure to work with you. The two looked at each other and smiled, but the smiles on their faces carried inexplicable deep meanings. There is no need to say too much. Their cooperation at the moment is indeed a helpless move. Others also began to look for their own partners, even though some of them were not willing to communicate with others at all. For example, the one covered in black armor and with a long lizard tail, you can tell at first glance that he is an alien from the Wulwan Empire under the fog valley of Star Island, Pokong. For example, there is a young man named Chongwan who is tall and muscular, wearing a black tight combat suit, with long black hair covering his face, and is suspected to be from the Qinling Dragon clan. For example, an unknown person who is covered in a huge black robe and has only a pair of eyes emitting a cold and dim light. For example, there is an alien wearing a strange combat uniform and an aquarium-like helmet on his head. There were too many strange guys. Zhang Yi watched them helplessly, being forced to find a team. Half an hour passed quickly, and the team formation was decided. The final grouping format is: the first team, Zhang Yi Chaos from Huashu Kingdom, Liang Yu, Nine Heavens Mysterious Lady, Yang Xinxin Untitled, Lu Karen Lu Ban, and Brian Griffin Supernova from Colombia. The second team, Britannia, King Arthur, leader of the Knights of the Round Table, the Europa Alliance, Odin, the God King of Asgard, the Imperial Church, the Knight of Death, Cardinal of the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, codenamed Archangel Michael Olib, the King of the Mechanical Civilization, Ichigal, the Lord of the Blue Era, the Mysterious Man in Black Robe, the black-armored lizard man breaking through the air. The third team, the mysterious long-haired youth Chongwan, the Pantheon of Fremons, Goddess of Winter, Morana, and God of Thunder Purin, Alexei Ivanov, the mysterious man Ji, wearing strange combat uniform, the Emperor of the Khatoon Empire, and the leader of the assassin sect, Saladin. The 3 teams were thus determined. Seeing the configurations of the other 2 teams, Bai Guzi felt a little guilty. He approached Zhang Yi and whispered, "Why do I feel that we don't stand a good chance of winning? These guys are more difficult to deal with, right?" Zhang Yi took a deep breath. "I know this without you telling me. But don't forget, those guys are so famous because they are all bishop-level extraordinary people who dominate the area." He pointed at his feet. "But here, in this world, they may not be as powerful as my companions." Zhang Yi looked at Yang Xinxin, Liang Yu, and Lu Karen, and said with a proud smile, "In the field of the same supernatural power level, my people will not lose to anyone." Bai Guzi stroked his forehead with one hand and said, all right, if a fight really breaks out, I can just block their IDs in my mind." Since I'm already on your pirate ship, I can only continue to follow you. After the teams were assigned and the managers confirmed their decisions one last time, the transfer began. Everyone turned into streams of light and were transported to the battlefield. The 4 knights and the manager can see everything that happens on the battlefield. The Cross Knight crossed his arms, looked at Ling not far away and asked Sword Knight, "Who do you think will make it to the end among these guys?" Ling looked at the battlefield and pointed at Zhang Yi's face without any hesitation. The other knights all looked at Zhang Yi. Are you sure? He looks ordinary, nothing special about him. The battle process is also extremely boring, and I am as cautious as a groundhog hiding underground. A smile suddenly appeared on Ling's face. He's funny, isn't he? Interesting? This word left the other knights speechless, because what they needed was a strong man who could change the world. How can an interesting person become the person they want? Don't judge everything by our past experience. After all, it turns out that everything we did failed. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here today. Ling said calmly, "This time, I want to try to do something different. Maybe this is the way to break the deadlock." "Oh, I see." Upon hearing this, some of the other knights looked thoughtful. However, the crusader pointed disapprovingly to the city where Ichigo and others were. Fantastic ideas won't make things go smoothly. Strength is the most important factor that determines everything. So I think they are the ones who will make it to the end. Ichigo's team is indeed the strongest among the 3 teams on paper. The reason is simple. It goes without saying that their individual strength is strong, not to mention they have a 6th person. When the strength of all members is brought to the same level, having one more person means a huge advantage. Ling didn't say anything else, but watched carefully what was happening on the battlefield. After a gust of sandstorm, Zhang Yi and his 4 companions and a dog appeared in a city. They had previously gained a general understanding of the world through 3-dimensional projection. The 3 cities were 500 kilometers apart. Even for an alien, it would take a long time to travel normally. Except Zhang Yi. As a user of space-related abilities, it only takes him a little over a minute to reach the next city. 4 people and a dog stood in the center of the city. This position was very high, and they could overlook the entire city. And behind them stands the tall statue. A statue that looks very much like a human, but with subtle differences. Everyone turned their eyes to Zhang Yi, who slowly took out a few sofas from the alien space and asked everyone to sit down. He took out some snacks and ate while chatting with everyone. Finally, Zhang Yi's gaze fell on Yang Xinxin. "Xinxin, just arrange what we need to do next." Yang Xinxin first picked up a piece of chocolate mochi from the coffee table and said while eating, "The situation we are in right now is similar to that of the 3 kingdoms. Because there are 3 forces, it is not enough to simply defeat one of them. There are 2 things we need to do. First, we need to protect our own city and prevent the statues from being damaged. Second, we need to find a way to destroy the statues of the other 2 families. And through the analysis of the situation on the field on the surface, King Arthur and his team are the strongest and should be the way kingdom among the 3 kingdoms. Although Mirana's team has 1 more person than us, we have the advantage of unity and mutual understanding, while they have many internal conflicts. Therefore, Mirana's team is the weakest, and it is Shu." Lu Karen curled his lips in dissatisfaction. "Then don't we become Jiangdong rats?" Yang Xinxin smiled faintly. "This is just an analogy. In fact, I think we are very strong. But from the perspective of the other 2 parties, judging by the pure strength of the aliens, our team is the weakest. Because we only have 2 true bishop-level aliens. Even though everyone's ability levels are brought to the same level here, instinctively everyone will still think that the combat effectiveness of me, Teacher Liang, and Ko Ran will be compromised. There is another crucial point," Yang Xinxin said with a playful smile. "The 3 of us are women, and we look young and tender. On the battlefield, women are always subconsciously considered to be weak. In particular, most people don't know Yang Xinxin and the other 2. They can hardly be considered famous compared to Morana, who is the top alien in a country." Brian spoke up now. "Hey, I don't quite understand what you're talking about. But can I assume that we are quite weak?" Yang Xinshin said calmly, at least on the surface. That's the case. We give people a very weak feeling, which is a good thing. Good thing. Brian frowned. If you give people a weak impression, you should be attacked first, right? Yang Xinshin shook her head. No, quite the opposite. Being considered the weakest and least threatening of the three parties will actually become our greatest advantage. She placed 3 cups on the coffee table. When there are 3 forces and only one can win, the best approach is for the 2 weaker forces to join forces and kill the strongest one first. So, the team King Arthur is in is the most dangerous. Zhang Yi nodded in understanding. That's right, because no one dared to cooperate with them. That's why Wu and Xu joined forces to fight against Chao Wei. Zhang Yi raised his head and looked at Yang Xinshin. Xinshin, do you mean that we should join forces with Morana and the others to kill King Arthur and the others first? Yang Xinshin nodded. Yes, this is the best choice. But this alone is not enough. She placed the cup representing King Arthur's team next to her own team's cup. King Arthur and the others should soon understand this truth. So, the biggest threat to them is actually the team that Morana is in. It's hard for the King Arthur team to fight 1 against 2. And if they are killed by Morana and us together, Morana's team will become our opponent again. On the surface, we are at a disadvantage in the competition with Morana's team. She paused, finished the chocolate mochi in her hand, and then said leisurely. So the wisest thing for King Arthur to do is to promise us benefits and then ask us to backstab the Morana team. Brian thought about what Yang Xinshin said, frowning, but no matter how we think about it, it's hard for us to be the final winner in these 2 situations. Yang Xinshin smiled, and her smile was extremely confident. But what if they got the situation between the 3 of us wrong from the beginning? Yang Xinshin stood up, stacked the 3 cups together, and placed the cup symbolizing their team on the top. If it really is the 3 kingdoms, then we are the Wei Kingdom. Zhang Yi also stood up and stared at the huge sculpture standing next to him. There is something I want to try. Since the criteria for our elimination is that all members are killed in battle or the sculpture is destroyed, can I put the sculpture into my alternate dimension? That way, you can avoid having your home robbed. Liang Yu stood up and said, Let me give it a try. She walked up to the huge sculpture, hugged the base with her arms, and then exerted force suddenly. The rules of the administrators are clear. A sculpture is considered obsolete only if it is destroyed, because it would not be against the rules to pull it out. Boom! Liang Yu used all his terrifying strength, holding onto the base tightly with both arms, and the ground beneath his feet began to shake violently. Zhang Yi and his companions felt a little unsteady on their feet, and even the whole city was shaking because of Liang Yu's power. But after working for a long time, the sculpture didn't move at all. Liang Yu reluctantly let go of her hand and said to Zhang Yi and the others, It seems that this little trick is ineffective. No, not necessarily. However, Zhang Yi keenly noticed something. He pondered for a moment and said, Liang Yu, when you pulled out the sculpture just now, although the sculpture seemed to be connected to the city and could not be pulled out at all. However, the city was shaking. Yang Xinshin and others' eyes lit up. Brother, you mean to take this city into your space? Zhang Yi smiled and nodded. Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. However, if this city disappears from sight, they will definitely find it. How can we solve this problem? Blaine inquired. Zhang Yi glanced down at his feet and saw that the entire city was built with huge stones, forming a seamless whole. An idea suddenly came to his mind. Brian, help me lift up the city. I will find a way to raise sand and wind to seal off this area and block their prying eyes. He looked at Lu Karen and said, Karen, I'll give you 1 day to build a similar city. Can you do it? Well, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. As long as it looks similar under the cover of wind and sand, it'll be fine. This stone city is not complicated. The battlefield setting should be in ancient times. Even the soldiers lined up outside the city are wearing ancient armor. Therefore, the entire city is built of stones, and most areas are connected into a whole. Outside, there are vast areas of gobi and desert, so it is not difficult to obtain local materials. It should not be difficult for Lu Karen to control the snowy owl and build a similar city. Liu Keenan took another look at the small stone city and nodded with a firm gaze. No problem. Leave it to me. Very good. Zhang Yi nodded immediately. He first asked Liu Karen to use equipment to isolate the signal in this area to prevent the other party from spying with modern technology. Then he created a large amount of wind and sand by absorbing a large amount of sand and dust nearby and throwing it into the air to block physical prying eyes. The three cities are 500 kilometers apart. Unless they were brave enough to get closer, from dozens of kilometers away, this area would be covered with yellow sand, and even the shadow of the stone city could not be seen. After doing all this, Zhang Yi and Brian looked at each other. Brian stood in front of the stone city and activated his ability, weightlessness. The city, which was not very big, immediately rose up from the ground with a boom. At first, Zhang Yi was worried that this would cause a warning from the administrators, but when he saw the entire city floating in the air without any reaction from the administrators, Zhang Yi immediately became excited. This method works. Zhang Yi immediately opened the dimensional door and brought the entire city and the statue into the different space. This scene was seen completely by the manager and the four knights.
Oh, you are such a cunning little thing.
You actually thought of this idea, the knight wearing the crown of thorns said with a teasing tone. He looked at the projection of the administrator and asked, "Does this count as exploiting a loophole in the rules?" "It's not against the rules," the manager said calmly. Being able to apply rules skillfully is also a kind of ability. People who follow the rules will find it difficult to achieve great things. When the rules were formulated, they created huge benefits for those who broke the rules. The Thorn Knight nodded. That's true. Zhang Yi and his companions were busy making plans and taking careful precautions, but Yang Xinxin told them that the people from those two parties would not come to cause trouble for them for the time being. 7 days is not a long time, but it is still plenty of time. The first thing they need to solve now is their own internal problems. Yang Xinxin leisurely held the cup, drank black tea, and analyzed the situation calmly. "Xinxin, what do you think?" Zhang Yi asked. Yang Xinxin said, "The biggest problem with a temporary team is that it is difficult for everyone to trust each other. The team also needs someone to take charge when disagreements arise. We are a team, so there will be no disagreements. Once we enter the battlefield, we can quickly execute various instructions. As for them, it's good enough that they don't fight." Speaking of this, Zhang Yi became a little curious. After thinking it over again and again, he asked Yang Xinxin, "I want to go and get some information from them now. Do you think I should go over there?" Yang Xinxin smiled and looked at Zhang. "Even if you don't tell me, I originally planned to do so. Don't worry about us. They won't have time to take advantage of the opportunity to launch a sneak attack. Brother, just go to their place without worries." Zhang Yi nodded. As a person with space ability, he could go nearby to spy on the information of other cities. Even if he was discovered, no one could stop him. Zhang Yi confirmed that nothing was missed before opening the dimensional door and fleeing towards the city where King Arthur and others were. After Zhang Yi left, Yang Xinxin put down the cup in her hand and walked to Liang Yu. Liang Yu held the spear in his backhand and looked around with a wary look on his face. Seeing Yang Xinxin, she hurriedly asked, "Xinxin, is there anything you need me to do?" Yang Xinxin stared at Liang Yu. "Teacher Liang, do you remember what we said before? There are some things that you do need to do. But don't tell your brother about this." Liang Yu was stunned for a moment. Then she understood. "I understand. We all believe in your ability. In order to win the final victory, no matter what you ask us to do, I will not doubt you." Yang Xinxin nodded. Yeah. She didn't say much. When the time was right, she would instruct Liang Yu and others to do things. "We have lived and died together for 3 years, and we have long trusted each other and are able to give ourselves completely to each other. In this case, there is no need to tell everyone the plan in advance, so as to avoid letting emotions affect the battle plan. The battlefield is cruel, and the most untouchable thing is emotions. Sometimes, sacrifices need to be made." Just as Yang Xinxin said, when Zhang Yi arrived near the city where King Arthur and others were, he immediately felt a powerful energy fluctuation. "Someone is fighting." Zhang Yi approached quietly. As a top-level space-time alien, it was extremely difficult for him to be detected when he tried to sneak into an area. Zhang Yi hid himself in the void to investigate. As expected, as soon as he arrived, he discovered that the two people fighting were Odin and Eturgel. Others either watched the battle indifferently from the sidelines, or sat in a corner of the city wall, quietly watching the two fight. This team is undoubtedly strong, but no one wants to be inferior to others. But everyone has their own ideas, and even the strongest team will become a mess. So, after a disagreement, Odin and Eturgel started fighting. When they were in the outside world, many Inhumans in Asgard died at the hands of the mechanical race, so the atmosphere at the scene was quite tense. Zhang Yi hid in the dark and spied. Odin rode an 8-winged Pegasus, and the eternal spear Gungnir in his hand flashed with silver thunder. After throwing it out from his hand, it directly locked onto Ichigal. His attacks cannot be avoided and can only be countered or temporarily evaded using specific abilities. Ichigal's fighting style was simple and crude. The huge red sword in his hand burst out with amazing energy. With a sweep of the sword, the terrifying sword pressure and the lightning spear annihilated each other in midair. Zhang Yi observed secretly, trying to remember the abilities of the two people. But at this moment, the black-armored stranger sitting in the corner raised his head and looked towards the empty space where Zhang Yi was. The marshal told me that there is an extraordinary young man in Tianhai City. He is good at hiding in the void and spying in a sinister way. It turns out he was right.